Okay. Good evening. Today is Wednesday, March 17th, and our presenter tonight is Rachel Adelstein. I want to welcome everybody. I am Daryl Cooperstock, and I am your tech host. Shoshana is your program host. I presume everybody can hear me. Tonight's session is being recorded and will be posted on the Becky website probably in the next couple of days. That's at becky.org/schmooze-recordings. There's no screen sharing tonight. However, we will have some wonderful audio sharing, and that'll be terrific. For everyone's sake, we ask that all participants remain muted during the presentation unless they've been called on to make a question or a comment. As always, you can request to ask a question or make a comment by sending a message to the chat to me. If you send it to everyone, I will also see it. Just gets there faster if you send it to me. We are going to have questions and comments at the end of Rachel's talk. I will take people in the order in which they request to ask questions or make comments or share their own melodies, I guess. And does anybody have any questions? Okay, so let me let these people in, and here they come. Okay, Shoshana, take it away.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm Shoshana from the Programming Committee. It is my pleasure to introduce Rachel Adelstein yet again. I'm beginning to think of her as Becky's very own ethnomusicologist. Is that a good thing? Okay, I was afraid, I wasn't sure you would like that. But every time she teaches with us, it's exceptional, it's interesting, we learn a lot, and I'm very much looking forward to it. Rachel, she's, as I said, an ethnomusicologist with a PhD from the University of Chicago, and she has a particular interest in contemporary Jewish liturgical music. And tonight we're going to learn about Passover songs, songs to sing at the Seder. So without any further ado, Rachel.
Thank you, Shoshana, and thank you so much for asking me to speak on this topic. Passover is one of my favorite holidays, and in fact, you may not be surprised to hear this. In large part, Passover music was sort of why I became an ethnomusicologist and why I ended up specializing in Jewish music. My family has this, as far as I can tell, completely unique tradition. I've never met anyone who knows the same melodies that we have, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But sort of in an effort to understand how it was that we had these unique melodies, you know, I ended up getting a PhD and becoming an ethnomusicologist. So this is a wonderful thing to talk about. As I said, Passover is one of my very favorite holidays because you get to see your family and you get to have this wonderful holiday dinner. For me, it meant going to Massachusetts and having Seder with my Aunt Vivian and Uncle Sherwin. And as the years went on, more and more and more cousins from Chicago, to the point where there were 20 and 30 people at my aunt's Seder. And the Seder, this really elaborate home ritual, I suspect I'm not the only one for whom this is one of their very earliest memories of a Jewish event, is is going to a Seder and singing around the table after the Seder with your family, a little bit lubricated perhaps by 4 cups of wine. And it's really it's an interesting event in the modern world because we don't sing around the table as families very often. This is something, certainly with the advent of sound recording, this is something that we do less and less, is get together with families to sing. For me, one of the great joys of Passover is that it's one of the handful of times throughout the year that I get to hear my father sing. My dad has a wonderful bass voice, but he is really self-conscious about singing, so he doesn't sing very often, except when it comes to Passover, at which point he cuts all of his inhibitions loose and will just bawl out songs as if he's at Wrigley Field singing "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," which is his other favorite thing to sing. And I'm not the only person who has wonderful family memories of Passover, and I'm not the only ethnomusicologist who does. I don't know how many of you know the name Abraham Tzvi Adelstein. Adelstein, he's considered to be the father of Jewish ethnomusicology. He was a musician and a scholar. He was born in Riga. He was from a cantorial family. And in the 20s and 30s, he went and visited Jerusalem. And one of the things that he did in Jerusalem was that he collected melodies from from families of all different Jewish nations who were moving. This was a time period in a place called the Yeshuv, and he collected melodies for every event that he possibly could, and he published them in 10 volumes. This is a classic of Jewish ethnomusicology, his Hebrew and Oriental Melody Treasure. And he had some memories about Passover from when he was a young boy in the beginning of the 20th century. And recently on another Zoom call, I was privileged to hear his great-grandson, Jonathan Magoon, who was talking about him. And Jonathan, who is A.Z. Edelstein's great-grandson, wrote a book called Nigun that is largely Edelstein's memories, stories that Edelstein had told his family. And so, he had a passage that he has in the book about Passover. So this is Adelstein speaking. At the Pesach table, Uncle Boaz and Aunt Fruma are here. The table is set on a white tablecloth, and we're eating gefilte fish, that is poached fish dumplings, matzo ball soup, roast chicken, potato kugel, and tzimmus, which is a stew of carrots and prunes, but Mama includes sweet potatoes. Uncle Boaz is an ultra-Orthodox chassid and does not set foot in a kor shul, that is, a shul with a choir. Our neighbor Tzipora is also there. She has no close family. The children ask the three questions. I don't know what happened to the fourth one, but the children ask the three questions, and the matzah is hidden and hunted for by the children. There's lots of singing. My favorite is Chad Gad Yah. It goes like this. An only goat that father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gad Yah, Chad Gad Yah. Then came a cat that ate the goat that father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gad Yah, Chad Gad Yah. And so it goes. Each verse builds on the previous one. In verse 1, you just have the cat killing the goat. But in the last verse, you have, then came the Holy One, blessed be he, that slew the angel of death, that killed the butcher, that slaughtered the ox, that drank the water, that quenched the fire, that burnt the stick, that beat the dog, that bit the cat, that ate the goat, that father bought for 2 zuzim. Chad Gad Yah, Chad Gad Yah. This song is sung very fast, one long verse and one deep breath. And for some reason, it makes everyone's heart beat fast and makes them extremely happy. Father explained, this song is a lot of fun, but we must not forget what it means. Chad Gad Yah is about the different nations that have conquered the land of Israel. The goat symbolizes the Jewish people, the cat, Assyria, the dog, Babylon, the stick, Persia, the fire, Macedonia, the water, the Roman Empire, the ox, the Saracens, the slaughterer, the Crusaders, and the angel of death, the Turks. At the end, God returns to send the Jews back to Israel. Tonight, we celebrate the fact that we are not slaves in the land of Egypt. And that is absolutely the memory of someone who would grow up to be the father of Jewish ethnomusicology. And like Adelstein, I'm sure that most of you have some kind of memory like that. A memory that isn't so much a memory of a song as it is a memory of the act of singing. And we're now approaching, I cannot believe I'm saying this, we're approaching our second Passover Seder that we have to have over Zoom. And here I am, I'm talking about the one part of the Seder that really doesn't work over Zoom. So what I'm hoping to do tonight is maybe to give you a little bit of a memory and also remind you that there are things to look forward to next year. We say next year in Jerusalem, but maybe we mean next year in person. So here's another Seder memory. A couple of years ago, this would be 2016, I was living in England at the time, and some family, my sister and my aunts Vivian and Joyce and my uncle Sherwin, decided to come and visit me, and I was going to host Passover for the very first time in England. And I invited my friend Graham, who had never been to a Seder. He'd never heard of a Seder. If you're English and you're not Jewish, you probably haven't heard of Seders. But Graham was completely down for this new experience. And he said, I'd love to come. What's a Seder? So at this point, how would you, I'm kind of curious. I'm going to turn some questions over to you. How would you have answered his question? Graham Andrews, classics PhD student, is looking at you, quite happy to be invited. And he says, what's a Seder? So I invite people to unmute and answer his question.
Keep it simple. It's a little bit of a ceremony, or maybe it might be a couple hours of ceremony before you finally get to dinner. But it's supposedly about, Moses getting us out of, God getting us out of Egypt, but how we go about telling it is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? How would you have answered Graham's question?
Oh, definitely put in the 4 cups of wine.
You know how you know the way to a Cambridgeite's heart. Any other answers?
The ritual dinner.
I can barely hear you.
Who's talking?
Gloria.
Oh, Gloria?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, can you speak up?
Yeah. It's a ritual dinner in which we recite from a book first and eat with many prayers over particular dishes or dip particular pieces of food that are on a ritual dish. And after we finish eating, we sing more songs. And that's the outline of a Seder. But you have to have been at the Seder to know what a Seder is.
I like that. I mean, I told Graham that the Seder is a dinner party where we relive the Jewish origin story. And we do that by storytelling, role playing, singing, and weird party games. And what's interesting about Passover, we've talked about this a little bit in past schmoozes that I've given. Somehow I managed to get muted. Passover is an exercise in memory rather than history. The story of the Exodus is a myth, and by a myth, I mean something where it doesn't matter whether it's historically true or not. I use a definition coined by Bill Savage at Northwestern University, that a myth is a story that a culture uses to explain itself to itself. So the historical facts of the matter are not important, but the truth of the story is a literary truth rather than a historical truth. My family uses this version of the Haggadah. I think this is a very common one. I think a lot of people probably use it. The text dates from 1947, and you can kind of tell. And there's an interesting passage in this Haggadah, fairly close to dinner. It's on page 23. It says, "In every generation, one must see oneself as though having personally come forth from Egypt," which I've always thought was a very interesting thing to say, because everybody at a Seder, and everybody in the family or the family of choice that's hosting the Seder is joining in a reenactment, in this sort of re-embodiment of a myth. And one of the things that we do to re-embody this myth is we sing. And one of the reasons that we sing is that we're transmitting so much about our origin story, about who we are as a people. And we can transmit far more with music with song than we can do with just the plain Haggadah text. Because we're not just giving each other the strict meaning of the words. There's this goat that the father buys, and then all this stuff happens with the barnyard animals and the goat. We're also giving each other the melody da 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 da, you know, which is near and dear to a lot of people's heart. And with a melody comes the history of the melody, the history of hearing your uncle sing it, or of teaching your grandchildren to sing it, and the memories of family members who are dead and the anticipation of new family members. We give each other the deeper symbolic meaning of the words. This is what Adelstein was talking about when his father explaining the symbolism of Chad Gadya. We give each other these special looks and winks, and maybe there's some family hand gestures that go with these songs. And we give each other this gift of the personal blend. Everybody's voice is unique. And so that the particular blend of voices at everybody's Seder, the way a Seder sounds is unique. So we're giving each other the sound of our families. I mean, in a way, the Passover Seder with all of the wine and all of the singing, lubricated by all of the wine, it's sort of the ultimate participatory Jewish event. My late great Uncle Bernie used to say, when he was leading Seders, I went to a couple of Seders that he led in Chicago. And before we sang anything, he would say, he was a lifelong cigar smoker, and you could really tell. He said, "We're looking for quantity, not quality." And he'd say it like that. And what he wanted was loud and vigorous participation with everyone sort of affirming life and being there in the moment. He didn't care if you had this gorgeous bel canto voice or not. He wanted you to be there and to add your particular voice to the mix. Because the Passover songs, they don't just tell us who we are as Jews, they tell us who we are. They tell us who we are as individuals and as families and as people with individual and family histories. The story of Exodus tells the story of the Jews as travelers, and our music tells us where we've been, and it tells us where we are right now, and it kind of hints at maybe where we might be going. Chad Gadya, we'll stick with that song for a while. It's a lot of fun as, you know, each verse getting longer and the story gets more elaborate and symbolic. But Chad Gadya, the thing about Chad Gadya is that it's also a very specific song, and it's specific to Jewish communities that are based in or that have their roots in Europe. Adelstein's father, you know, tells us about the meaning of the words, and Adelstein's father's interpretation of the song is very centered on the land of Israel. But the form of the song tells us a lot more about the Jews of Europe. Because Chad Gadya, the structure of Chad Gadya is very similar to a number of other songs, a number of other folk songs that we might be familiar with. Songs like The House, or poems like The House That Jack Built. There Was an Old Lady Who Swallowed the Fly. The firm's 1987 classic, Star Trek and Across the Universe. You saw from another minor religious tradition that we know of in this country, the 12 Days of Christmas. The thing that these songs all have in common, they're a European form called a cumulative song. A cumulative song is one where each verse builds on the verse that came before it. So we have the goat that father bought, then we have the cat that ate the goat, we have the dog that ate the cat that ate the goat, and it kind of keeps on going until you get to this very, very long ending verse. And this is a very European folk song style. So we now have our own cumulative song. The Passover story tells about the fact that we traveled from Egypt in North Africa into the land of Israel in Western Asia in the Levant. But the song also reminds us that that there are there were Jewish communities in Europe. There still are Jewish communities in Europe, and that many of us on this call, that we have roots in those Jewish communities in Europe, and that we then traveled from Europe to North America. And these places that we've traveled are also as much part of our culture and our heritage and our cultural memory as the musical motives and the styles of chant that we get from the Middle East, from the Levant. So our music tells us sort of how we've thought about Jewishness in all the different places that we've lived and all the different continents that we've lived on, and the kind of sounded cultural exchange that we've had. And I think that this flexibility that's allowed us to remain Jewish while absorbing so many different cultural cultural influences. It's one of our great strengths as a people. It's one of the reasons that although we're a very tiny people, that we are a people that keeps on keeping on, because we can bend, we can go with the flow, and we can absorb new things. So I think that's enough about Chad Gad Yah right now. I want to go on to we have another cumulative song in the Seder. Chad Gad Yah is not our only cumulative song. And I want to tell you about, this is one that this is one of the ones that my family has a great sort of own version of. And I want to tell you a little bit about it because sometimes our Passover music does get that specific. It gets right down to the family level. And it tells me who I am as a person and about the families that I was born into and that I'm connected to. So I learned Hebrew in graduate school, starting when I was in Wisconsin doing my master's degree. And during that first year of Hebrew class, our teacher wanted us all to sing Echad Mi Yodea. This is a song that we know, right? Can I ask somebody on this call who really loves the song just to sing a couple of lines of it so we have the melody in our head? And I need someone else to sing this right now. So.
I can sing it, Sasha.
All right. Yes, please. Just a couple of lines.
Echad אני יודע, אחד אני יודע, אחד אלוהינו, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ, שניים מי יודע, שניים אני יודע, שני לוחות הברית, אחד אלוהינו, 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 שבשמיים ובארץ.
Thank you, Sasha. That is, so you can hear the cumulative structure of the song, and that's going to, get to 13 verses in the end. Thank you. I'm very glad that you sang that because I don't really know that version that well. And my Hebrew teacher did not believe me when I told her this. She said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Everybody knows Echad Mi Yodea." And I didn't.
Rachel, the truth is actually that mine isn't exactly the same as from the Americans.
Exactly, and so that is exactly what we're going to talk about. That's what you sang. Is I think the most common melody in North America. But Echad Mi Yodea is a song that has so many different variations. It's not just that melody that you sang. It's very often sung in a local vernacular, and that you probably have an interesting family version of it. There are versions of it in Italian and in Ladino and English and in Yiddish. I actually have a couple of recordings of this I have a recording in Italian and one in Ladino. And if you'd like, we can hear little snippets of them right now. I'm gonna share the sound on my computer. So we're down here and we're going to hear, so this is an Italian version. We're only going to hear a little bit of it.
Uno chissà è uno che io lo so, come Dio che in cielo è, uno pure uno è. Due chissà e due che io lo so, due le tavole della legge, uno è Dio che in cielo è, uno pure uno è. Tre chissà e tre che io lo so, tre padri nostri sono Abramo, Isacco e Jacopo, due le tavole della legge, uno è Dio che in cielo è, uno pure uno è.
So there is an Italian version of it. Now we're going to hear one sung in Ladino. This is from Spain or from Turkey.
Quien supiense y entendiense alabar al Dios criense, cuál es el uno, cuál es el uno. Uno es el criador, uno es el criador, uno es el criador, Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo. Quien supiense y entendiense alabar al Dios criense, cuáles son los dos. ¿Cuáles son los dos? Dos Moshe y Aarón. Uno es el criador, uno es el criador. Baruch Hu, Baruch Shemo. Quien supiense y entendiense, alabar al Dios criense. ¿Cuáles son los tres? ¿Cuáles son los tres?
I mean, we could go on listening to this forever, but we don't have that kind of time.
I have a question.
Yes.
It sounded like he was singing that two were Aaron and Moshe.
There are,
So it's not just the tune that's different, but it's the words that are different.
Yes. And that's one of the interesting things about Echad Miyodea is that it's a song that comes in a lot of different versions because it's a song that's not aimed at the divine. There's a lot of Passover songs, we'll talk about some of them, are aimed at God, and this one isn't. This is aimed at kids, and I told Graham we had weird party games, and this could be a weird party game. It's a game to keep kids engaged. It's a game to teach them. It's a game to teach them how to count, to teach them some Jewish culture that might go with that counting. And it's part of the great family experience and the teaching how to be Jewish that we do at Passover. And like I said, my family has its own version of this song. We have family song sheets. And this is our version of the song. It's written out here. And this does not give you any understanding of how complex this piece is. Because the melody is, of course, passed on orally. So the melody that we have, and I'll sing it in a bit, but first I'll tell you where it came from. Way back in the 1920s, and this was something that my Uncle Sherwin told me, this is pure family legend. We had a cousin, there was a family cousin who I'm told was named Finkelstein, and I don't know any other name for this person beyond Finkelstein. And Finkelstein traveled for a while in the Yishuv, the same area that Adelstein was in. Probably around the time that it was part of Mandatory Palestine. And like Adelstein, Finkelstein had a good ear, and he picked up a number of tunes from local families who spoke Aramaic. And so he picked up two melodies, and one of them was this song, Echad Man Yada, which is how you say Echad Mi Yodea in Aramaic. And in his song, it's sung as a game between the teacher and the students. And when I demonstrate it, I will attempt to sing both parts, but I promise you it's a lot more fun with more people. So usually what happens is my uncle will be the teacher and the rest of the family will be the class. And Finkelstein carefully wrote down a transliteration of the lyrics. That's this transliteration that I showed you. We've actually had Aramaic scholars come in and look at this and say, that's not a bad transliteration. He brought the melody and little game that went with it home to his family. And this melody got passed to his Greenblatt cousins in Chicago, who preserved the transliteration and sort of the gist of the melody, given, as Uncle Bernie says, our family motto is quantity, not quality. And so my Uncle Sherwin Greenblatt, who's married to my Aunt Vivian, brought it with him when he moved to New England. And so 100 years after cousin Finkelstein picked up this song somewhere in Mandatory Palestine and he loved it, generation after generation of my family have now made this the #1 hit on the family hit parade. It's Echad Man Yada. And I don't know if this is how it sounded in the Yishuv in 1921, but I can tell you that in New England in 2021, it is going to sound a little bit like this. The leader starts, Echad Man Yada, Man Yada. The class responds, Echad Anu Yada, Anu Yada. Bum, biddly-um, bum, 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 biddly-um, bum, bum. And then there comes a series of questions and answers. Echad, Elohu, Moran devishmaye divreyahu. Moran devishmaye divreyahu. And that's all well and good. So you start the game over again, except you start with number 2. Tere man yada, man yada. Tere anu yada, anu yada. Bum, biddly-um, bum, 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 bum. Bilyum bum bum. Then you ask, Tere, Nichayu, Achad, Elohu, Moran Devishmaye Devreyahu, Moran Devishmaye Devreyahu. And of course, this is all fun and games, but you have to remember it's the end of a very long evening. We have had quite a lot to eat and drink. And this song has 13 verses. And as the song goes on, it gets faster and it gets faster. And the trick is that you have to be the first one to give the answer, but you cannot answer the question before it has been asked. And so Uncle Sherwin will sometimes stop in his listing. So for all the way down at verse 9, Tasha, Ledasu, Tmanya, Melasu, Shaba, Shabatu, Shita, Mishnasu. And so we all try to be the very first one. So it devolves into chaos, but we always return to that chorus at the end. Moran Devishmaye Devreyahu, Moran Devishmaye Devreyahu. And we can just imagine my dad completely lost in his element singing this song. This is one of the greatest things that Passover. The last Seder we all had together, my cousin Marcia brought her new husband, Bob, who isn't Jewish. And Bob had been expecting a nice family dinner. And then he got this song and my mom took a video so Bob is preserved forever, sitting at the table, looking like this as we all burst into song. It's absolutely wonderful. So Cousin Finkelstein also gave us another melody. And so we're now moving on from Achad Manyada. Cousin Finkelstein gave us another melody. This is another song from the Yeshuv. He gave us his version of Adir Hu. Adir Hu, I was just looking it up today, and Cantor Daniel Mutlu, who is one of the cantors at Central Synagogue in New York City, describes Adir Hu as sort of the quintessential Passover song. It's a listing of all of the many awe-inspiring attributes of the divine. The song's about 400 years old. And as far as I can tell, it's sung in Hebrew in just about every community where it's sung. So this is not one that gets translated into vernaculars. But again, different communities have different melodies. And I'm wondering if somebody can sing me a melody that they know for it, just a verse or two. And then I will trade you mine for it. Isaiah, please unmute yourself. We'd like to hear a melody.
Adirhu, Yivne Beit Abakarav, Bimhera, Biyamenu Bekarov, El Bnei, Bnei Beit Chavakarav, El Bnei Beit Chavakarav, Bachurhu, and so on.
Thank you. That is a lovely melody. So I will now trade you mine. I have never found anyone, by the way, who knows either Achad Manyada as we sing it or Adir Hu as we sing it. So here's ours. This is a melody from the Yeshuv in the 1920s, as translated through several generations of enthusiastic singers from Chicago. Adir Hu Yivne Vezel Bekorov. Bimheira, Byameinu Bekarov, El Bnei Vescha Bekarov, Bachor Hu, Gadol Hu, Dagol Hu, Yivne Vezel Bekarov. Bimheira, Byameinu Bekarov. Everybody together. El Bnei Vescha Bekarov. And you got to bang on the table really hard when you sing this song. So this is a song about the glory of God. This is a song that is addressed to God. But it's also a song about a Jewish traveler who had an open mind, who had a really good ear. And it's a song about a family that gathers together to sing absolutely at the top of its lungs, everybody singing in their own individual key, pounding on tables, bawling out this wonderful chorus, just for the joy of the festival and for the joy of being free, but also for the joy of being a family and being together. So these are the memories that we hold on to when we sing at Passover. We remember our travels out of Egypt. We sort of pass this memory on, even though none of us were physically present, although there is that wonderful midrash that says that we were all spiritually present when the law was given, sort of Haggadah 2, Electric Boogaloo. We remember this long trek through the Levant. We remember the philosophy and the myth and the history that we get from the sages. And we remember the music and the games of all the places that we've lived. We also remember our aunts and our uncles and our cousins and our grandparents and all the places that they went and all the experiences that they've had and all the pictures and songs and recipes that they brought back. Maybe we remember being little and singing the 4 questions, or maybe we remember being little and squirming and hiding and kind of sticking our fingers in our mouths because we didn't want to say the 4 questions. And we remember being a little bit bigger and managing to stay awake till the end of the Seder, the first time that you didn't fall asleep right after dinner. And we remember making new Seders and all of our favorite songs with our families. And we remember making new family members, new Seders, new traditions. And we also remember everybody singing on mute last year at our Zoom Seders and saying, maybe this time we'll all unmute and maybe this one time Zoom will let us all sing together, and then listening as it devolved into chaos. And this is all going to be part of our story. We're all going to remember this once we get back together again and we have Seders in person. The years that we had Zoom Seders are also going to become part of this history, and we'll all remember looking at each other in little boxes and singing. And this is just going to be another layer of the memories that we have with this wonderful holiday of memory and storytelling and the re-embodiment of our pasts. And I cannot wait until Zoom Seders are part of our memory and not part of our present. So that's what I have to say. And I invite you to share your favorite memories of Passover and share a melody or two if you want.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Nobody has sent me a message, but it looks like some people are pretty enthusiastic about maybe sharing some things. The first hand I saw go up was Isaiah. Did you want to share something, Isaiah? Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about, I sent a message to Rachel. My family is musical, and when we would recite Birkat Hamazon, it was often in 2, 3, and maybe sometimes 4-part harmony. And that was always exciting. But I seem to remember, my mother's youngest brother married Aunt Shirley Schragus, who is distantly related to Bill Schragus. And I remember going to Aunt Shirley's parents' house for a Seder when I was a kid. And all of a sudden we got to the songs and they had different melodies for all the songs. And those different melodies became part of our melody set that we used. So, and I was thinking of Kilo Na'eh, and I loved the melody that we learned for that, which I always think of as a Venetian boatman song, because it goes, Ahadir bimlucha, Bacha kahalacha, Gedudav yomrula, Lecha, Lecha, ki lecha, lecha, aflecha, lecha, Adonai hamamlecha, ki lo na'eh, ki lo ya'eh, and it goes on from there. But it's very different from every other version I know.
That is really lovely. And the Italian version of Echad Mi Yodea that we played, that's on a very long track of Italian Seder melodies. And the one actually on the track right before it is Kilo Noe. So I might have to go back and listen to that and see if it's the same melody.
Could be. I mean, that's just my impression of it. I don't think there's anything particularly Italian about the melody, but It
But if
always
it-
made me think of
But
that.
you know, if it's one in Italy, I'll listen to it, and if it seems similar, I might send you a snippet of it.
Love it.
Thank you, Isaiah. I think Sasha had her hand raised, and before you start with your question or your comment, Sasha, I'd like to remind people that I prefer you not raise your hand in your cell because we've got 2 pages and it'll be hard for me to keep track. I'd rather keep track by just send me the word question or comment, and I'll be sure to make sure that you I'll be sure to acknowledge it and get you on the list. Okay, go ahead, Sasha. Thank you.
So I grew up very secular, actually. We were Jewish. My father lived in Israel, but we didn't do anything observant, no Shabbat, no holidays, no nothing. And I was a child when we lived in Castricum, and as far as I know at that time, and probably it's not true, but that's how we thought about it, there was one other Jewish family in all of Castricum, and it was a town, but not a nothing town. And they celebrated Passover, and the father in that household came from an Orthodox background. And Passover was the only Jewish thing that I did every year. For me, Passover was my Jewish religious identity. It's where I learned to bench. It's where we learned the 4 questions. And the father's name was Rudy. He always made it interesting for us. And as we got older, we would get together on Christmas. We didn't observe Christmas at all, but everybody was off. So it was a great time to get together. And we would start planning Passover and who would play which melody. And Rudy would get the sheet music, and we would plan acting out things. And my father was very atheistic, and he would get some interesting material on the scientific merits of Passover. And also, if Passover was not on the weekend, we made it on the weekend. But it gave me a very strong Jewish observant background related to Passover, and it really gave me the joy for that. And you know, it was very, very special for many years.
That's lovely. I mean, that really does kind of resonate with my experience of Passover. Like you, my family was also extremely secular. And so Passover was sort of the big, we all get together and we be big fat Jews for a week. And we also do a Saturday Seder. And the reason that I was always told that we had a Saturday Seder was that we live in Connecticut and my aunt and uncle live in Massachusetts. So it was a significant drive. And so we wanted to stay and visit with the family. And there's 4 glasses of wine. So nobody wants to drive 100 miles from Boston back to Middletown at that point. And having it on the weekend meant that we could all stay over. And so for me, Passover continues to the next morning with the matzah brie brunch. And then only after the matzah brie brunch do we go home, and then you can go back to school. So for me, Seder night is always Saturday. It's a wonderful thing. We're actually having it on the 27th.
Nice. Isaiah, you had a comment, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, Rachel, when you said that when you were living in England, your family came over and you led your first Seder, it made me think of when I lived in Memphis, and I led my first Seder, and I invited to my apartment all of the errant Jews who were in the music school. You know, the horn teacher, the saxophone teacher, and ironically, of course, the horn teacher and the saxophone teacher and his girlfriend, Kelly Flanagan, who eventually did become Jewish when they got married, and my then girlfriend, who was Patty Pylon, who was Irish Catholic. But, you know, and I led the Seder, and we got through it, and I didn't know what anyone else wanted, and I just sort of found my way through. I'd been to a million Seders. I knew I could lead it, but I didn't know whether I would be doing too much for everyone or not. and we got done and we ate and we did some part of it afterwards, and then everyone left, and I was 26 maybe, and first Seder I'm leading, and it felt very much like it was the change of a generation. Like all of a sudden, my father died when I was 13, but then it felt like he was really dead because I was leading the Seder. Yeah. I burst out into tears afterwards. It was very moving.
There is nothing like taking on the responsibility of a family holiday to make you feel like a grown-up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Isaiah.
One of the things that I learned by doing that was just how much work it is to cook a Passover Seder.
Yes.
I had a newfound appreciation for my aunts for doing that.
Thank you. So I had a comment. In my family, we went to, as many people, for the first night we went to one side, and for the second night we would go to the other side. And the first side was always the one I really loved. It was my grandfather led the Seder, etc. And we never did Birkat HaMazon, etc. We would go straight, right after Afikomen, we would go straight to the singing. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until we were in high school and my brother and sister and I got involved in USY and learned how to bench that all of a sudden we asked my grandfather, and he thought we were going crazy from on him. But we ended up doing it. And to this day, they still do Birkat HaMazon as part, even though, we're flung in different places. But our tradition, because we didn't have that whole last part of the Seder, but we had a Seder that lasted a long time. And the kids were going to different Hebrew schools and different people were from different places. My grandfather's tradition was to let everybody take a turn singing their version of every song. Whoa. So if we had 4 different versions of Vahisha Amda, that's what we did, ending with his, mm-hmm. which he learned growing up. And starting with the Hebrew school kids, and we would go through each version, and as people got married, etc., they brought their families' versions in, and it's great. And then now that the younger generation is starting to lead, they have to make decisions because they have little kids running around. Like, we cannot do 5 versions of Vahisha Amda, and then 3 versions of Echad Miodea, and 2 versions of Chad Gadya. So that's an interesting thing about inclusion in our family. Everybody learned everybody else's tunes. Mm-hmm. The one other thing that I will say is the Chad Gadya we always sang was the one that Echad Miodea, the one that's the one we grew up with. Mm-hmm. And when Dina went to college, Dina is our older daughter, she was not able to come home. I think it was 1 year she was not able to come home, and she had a Seder with people at school, and she learned a new melody, which mm-hmm. she loved, and came back and taught it to us. And she thought that the melody was a Sephardic melody. And she taught it to us, and we had this whole rhythm thing going, etc. And it became the favorite tune of my family from that point on. And as a matter of fact, David and I loved it so much that we started, this was really several years ago, we introduced it at Becky on the Shabbat before Pesach started. Mm-hmm. At Kiddush, we taught this version, and we had everybody doing this and everybody banging on the tables to provide the rhythm. And then each year, some people would learn it and sing it. It was wonderful. And we missed that, certainly, having that at, at Becky last year. Roya especially loved this melody. And I only found out last year that it's not a Sephardic melody. As a matter of fact, some of you may have even seen it on YouTube. There's a YouTube of this wonderful chassid. What's his name? Sholem Lemmer, I think is his name. L-E-M, Sholem Lemmer. And he does this absolutely mind-blowing version of Chad Gadya, and the melody is pretty much the same, but it is so Hasidishized that it's absolutely entrancing. So I suggest to people, especially if you heard our version of it, which goes Chad Gadya, and everybody does that as the background, and then we that version. If you go and hear Sholem Lemmer, you'll just be blown away. So it's interesting that this was brought to Dina, and we brought it to my family, and then we brought it to the Minyan. And I know there are people at Becky who like it so much that they've taken it to their family Seders. It's a wonderful thing to watch the music spread like that. Oh, Rachel Beshefkin is posting the link on YouTube to Sholem Lemmer. So enjoy, but not during our session. Excellent. Go afterwards. Yes, copy the link and then go afterwards.
Well, that's fabulous. I have a friend who's been, I have a colleague who has been working with Sholem Lemmer on some of his,
he's amazing.
Bringing back old Hazanas projects. So this will be fun to hear him.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. I think let me take a look. I think Marcia wasn't first. So let me go back because I was talking and not taking people's names. Okay. I think Donna had the first comment, and then after Donna will be Marcia. Okay.
And Diane.
Oh.
Yeah, I just want to say, much to my regret, I come from a decidedly unmusical family. And all of us, nobody can carry a tune, nobody can remember a tune, nobody can fully appreciate a tune. And so there were no tunes in our house, except on Passover, when there were a lot of jokes, by the way, but not a lot of tunes. But on Passover, we all sang around the table. If it was only Dayenu or something, suddenly our family was singing. And now Alana can carry a tune in the next generation. And I think some of my grandchildren may be able to carry tunes too. So it's very exciting. I can't teach them, but it'll be exciting to have that presence. And but it's interesting that Passover does bring out the singing.
Well, and always remember, you have Uncle Bernie's maxim to fall back on. Quantity, not quality.
Right, great. Thanks, Donna. Marcia, you had a comment, and then Diane.
Okay, so I have a few comments from through the years. As a little girl, we always went from Reading, Pennsylvania to Philadelphia to my mother's parents. And they, lived in this little row house in South Philadelphia. And my grandfather was the kind who muttered the entire Seder to himself, and everybody around the table, enjoyed the food, and even after we had the dinner or whatever, he would say the rest of the prayers, and the rest, no one else was paying attention to them. I don't remember a lot of singing at those Seders, but I am told that as a little girl, I was given this little tiny glass beer mug with real wine, and I was allowed to have wine as a little girl, and that that everyone laughed that I was shikker, so it was kind of a fun memory. So moving into my family and of origin, there were 4 of us kids, and I remember later Seders where it would just be fun to be drinking wine and being around the table, and people started laughing because they were, under the influence of the wine, but it was just a good time that we had. And during my Hebrew school years, the songs were all we will always have a model Seder at Hebrew school. And the songs were always in the transliteration, not in the Hebrew. And I learned Adir Hu as Bim Hey Ra, Menu Biko Rav, because that was K-O-R-O-V. And so I never knew it was Karov, until way later. So, things get mixed up that way. The Seders, skipping ahead to the Seders of the family that I being married and having kids of our own, we got introduced to Yoram Gaon, who sang the Ladino song that you introduced. And we always listened to this record as we clean for Pesach. So that was a great thing to put on the music. And even Sarah, when she would come for Passover, would put on the record and as we get ready and Pesach meals. And from there, we took the Seder mnemonic, because his melody was Kadesh Urchatz Karpas Yachatz Magid Rochza Motzi Matzah. So we always, as a family, do that Seder mnemonic in between every part of the service and then stop. And of course, as people drink more wine, they don't remember to stop, and everyone giggles, and it's kind of fun. The other thing that we always do at our Seders is singing the Pesach song, which I have a copy of from 1998. Once there was emails, we emailed it around to each other, and it goes to the tune of, "These are a few of my favorite things: cleaning and cooking and so many dishes. Out with the chametz, no pasta, no knishes. Fish that's gefilte, horseradish that stings. These are a few of our Passover things," and so forth. There are other verses. We always sing that before starting.
That is glorious, and I love it.
Thanks, Marcia. Diane, I think you have the next.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Rachel Bashevkin for declaring that dust is not chametz. I really appreciated that. And in her little, if people read her comments this week, I agree with Isaiah that the first time we did our own Seder, it was like, oh my God, we're part of the older generation. It was a movement in time. It really was. I never went to other Seders because my grandfather was the patriarch of the family and everybody came to us. And my grandfather also would freight train through the beginning of the Seder because he was hungry. And then after that, we had a couple of more cups of wine, and my Aunt Thela would start to sing. She could carry a tune like I could carry an elephant, but we were all so soused at that point. We all loved it. But and then she started speaking Yiddish, which she could not do. And she was getting everything all mixed up. Plus she had a little bit too much, she was too tishnushkid to really know what she was saying. But we always had a really great time. When Dan and I started doing our own Seders, we invited a variety of people, and we were always amazed that so many people don't know that there's a second half to the Seder, which is really the great part where you sing and drink all the wine and everything. So we just indoctrinated some people into the correct way of the Seder. My oldest son was born right before Pesach, and that was the year Dan got dishpan hands, and he started to really appreciate Pesach the way I made it. Because I would sit at the kitchen table because I really couldn't get around too much. My son was like 3 days old, and I would just mix stuff up, hand it to him. He'd wash the pots, hand them back to me. And yes, we had a Seder that year. My daughter and I everybody was bringing new questions to ask and readings for the Seder. And, we gave up on Manischewitz, Haggadah at that point, or not Manischewitz, the coffee, Maxwell House. I'm wrong. Yeah. The Maxwell, we gave up on that one. And my daughter Eliza and I made up our own Prevalent Family Seder book. And that's the one we use up until this day. Because we enjoy it. And then it has room, it's a loose leaf, so we can add the readings that people want and change. I know this year we got some new questions from Jewish National Fund or someplace like that, which we're going to incorporate on Zoom, unfortunately. And then one other thing, my family never made matzah brai. They made geschlagene matzah. I don't know if anybody's ever heard that term, but my grandmother called it geschlagene matzah, mixed up matzah. And when my daughter went away to school, you know, she said, Ma, nobody knows what geschlagene matzah is. And I said, well, I don't know, you know, that I had never heard the term matzah brai in my family. So she learned that matzah brai and geschlagene matzah really are the same thing. And it was a revelation to both of us. Thank you.
That is wonderful. I'm really enjoying hearing all of these memories. They're such wonderful, lively stories about how Passover is so different. I love it.
That was it on the comments we had lined up. Does anybody else have anything? Oh, Helene?
Well, my earliest memory of was we always did the second Seder was in Teaneck, New Jersey. So it was a big trip. And I remember at the end of Seder one year, looking up at the moon and noticing that the moon followed us all the way home. And I thought that was the most incredible thing. And that was one, but that Seder also had my Uncle Herman, who would kind of, I love the expression, somebody said, chug through the Seder in the Haggadah, and nobody was sort of paying attention. Every now and then somebody would do an English reading, but my mom and I were the singers. So we insisted on songs as we went through and, you know, plowed through and made people stop and sing some of the songs. And that was really fun. And my mother was like nuts with Dayenu. Everybody was saying, Blanche, Dayenu, Dayenu, enough already. And then later on, one of my teacher friends that when I was teaching was an ex-nun. And the Catholic Church was doing Seders. And she invited me to join the Seder. And I was the only Jew at the Seder. And they did quite a good job of copying the Haggadah and being appropriate with it. And at one point I said, I now know the difference between Christianity and Judaism. And everybody was deadly silent because these words of wisdom were going to come from the Jewish person. And I said, well, first of all, you don't have Elijah's cup, because for us, that means the coming of the Messiah. And for you, he's already come. So that's one. And I said, and the other thing is the noise level. I have never been at such a quiet Seder in my life. It was like, at our Seders, the kids are all crazy and jumping around and carrying on, and the parents are all talking, and that kind of chilled out the Seder and made it more fun for everybody, I think.
A silent Seder seems so weird to contemplate.
Thanks, Helene. Sarah, you had a comment?
It was sort of. So I remember, this wasn't my memory, but a friend of ours, his wife had given birth just before Pesach started, and she was passed out on the bed. And so he and one nurse were up, you know, sometime after 11 with the matzah and the wine, and just over the silly bed you have, or the silly table you have over the patients, trying to do a Seder very quietly from memory. So it was just Ruth Greenblatt had said, I love that Seders can be so fluid. Well, there's a fluid one.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure that some people have had this similar experience, that when you get married and you suddenly bring two families together who have very different traditions with Pesach, it's an interesting thing to see how those traditions can be sort of synthesized together. And I don't even know if that's the word I mean, but David and I had a really, really drastic difference in the way that our families celebrated Seder. My family, it was a very big family. And we always took, my grandfather led the Seder, but we always went around and each took a paragraph. And, whether most people would read in English, sometimes people would read in Hebrew, especially somebody who wanted to show off because they were in Hebrew school. And as soon as we came to a song of any kind, we would stop and sing. But except for the 4 questions, there was no discussion about the story. There were no questions encouraged. And I think my grandfather would have been scared for anybody to ask a question that he might have had to answer. And when David and I got married and I went to his family for the first time, I was, and we usually had at least 40 people at both Seders. David has a very small family. His parents were survivors, and it really was only the nuclear family. Every once in a while, they'd have 1 or 2 extra guests, and his family Seder, they did the davening through the Seder thing. And his mother would be in the kitchen working on getting things ready, and she would hardly be in at the Seder at all. But David and his sister knew exactly where to break in because they would follow what his father was saying. They knew exactly where to break in, and they really did ask questions. They sort of had thought these questions out ahead of time, etc., so that there was quite a bit of discussion. And so this was just totally, totally different than what my family's Pesach experience had been. And both of us loved really pieces from both families. And so when we started to host Seder, and actually we hosted a Seder for the first time the year before we moved to Connecticut. And I thought, oh, I guess I'm the one who's going to inherit this. And I was actually quite excited. As you know, I love cooking for people. And we had over 40 people. And we did just that. It was an amalgamation of all of the things we loved from each side of from his family and my family. And we've continued that as we've hosted Seders here. And that bounces back on each side to the other families. It's just a wonderfully evolving thing to watch in families as you bring different traditions together. And anyway, I'm just sharing that.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
I also really like, and I will have to incorporate into my daily life, the phrase that I think it might have been Diane who said a few minutes ago, that her family could carry a tune like she could carry an elephant. I'm going to have to incorporate that into my daily vocabulary.
Cute. Okay, I think that's it, unless we have any last comments. Shoshana?
Yes, thank you so much, Rachel. As always, really enjoyable, learned a lot, great melodies, great stories. And I really enjoyed hearing from people about their personal experiences and traditions. It's very nice. It's a very helpful way to get ready for the holiday. Next week, we have a program Wednesday evening. I think it's aimed to families with young kids, but I think it's also open to anybody who wants to come. Making the Passover Seder meaningful and fun. And it's going to be led by Annie Norman Schiff, who's our youth director, and a very knowledgeable and interesting person. So I think it'll be a really fun program. And that's also 8 o'clock Wednesday on Zoom here. Maybe you can, kosher some silverware while you're watching the Zoom. I don't know, whatever people are doing. I know next week is not a great week, but if you want to take a break, come on over. And again, thank you so much. And I hope everybody has a wonderful Pesach. And Daryl, I hope you have a good trip. I'm not going to see you. And I hope it's great.
Yes, thank you very much. We have quite a weekend. We have Dina's 40th birthday is on Friday.
Oh, boy.
My father's yahrzeit is on Saturday. Saturday night is the first Seder, and we'll be in LA, and it will be our grandson's first Pesach.
Oh,
So we're really excited to be going, and we will be thinking of everybody here a little bit.
we'll be thinking of you. I hope it's really wonderful.
A little bit and enjoying being together with them finally. Thank
This
you
is your
very much.
first in person with your grandson, right?
It is, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're gonna have to say special, like double shehechianus or something.
Travel
That's a
safe.
mask check. Yeah.
I will. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you everybody for coming, and
Thank you.
thank you all for sharing the stories. That was
great.
a really wonderful way to end this, was everybody sharing stories.
Again, before you leave, the recording will be available probably by Friday on the Becky website. Just look under the learning menu. It's the last choice, our online schmooze recordings. Thanks very much, everybody. Have a good evening.
Good
Good
night. Bye-bye.
night. Thank you,
Night.
Rachel.
Bye.
Night.
Isaiah, I want you to learn that. Oh, where did he go? Isaiah?
He's there. Yeah,
I
he's
want you
still
to
there.
learn that, that order of the Seder, the Ladino order of the Seder melody.
Yeah, I want to learn that too. That's
So you-
different from what we do.
So you have assignment.
Yeah. But maybe maybe
Wait,
Rachel can
who
give us-
offered that? Did Rachel?
Wasn't that
Marsha.
I think
Marcia?
Marsha, can you
Oh,
record that?
Marcia, did you?
I'd be happy to share that in
That's
whatever
so
way we.
beautiful. It would be really fun to have something a little different.
Yeah, I would like that also.
Record it on your phone and send it on. That would be
So
great.
you know what, if you can send it to, if you want it, so Diane wants it.
Yes, please.
I
You know
we
what?
want it. Colton's want it.
You know what we could do?
Yeah, somehow record it and have it.
Yeah, if you can record it, Marcia, and send it to either me or to Eric, we'll have it posted on the website by the recording of this session. In other words, as an extra thing, and send a link. But we need to do that. We'll need to do that soon for the link to go out in time for people to learn it before the Seder. So that would be like tomorrow morning.
Got it.
Whatever.
Thank you.
Unless you can find, Marcia, unless you find a recording on YouTube of somebody already doing it.
I'll see if Yoram Gaon does it.
Yeah, yeah, it's possible. Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty.
Okay. Thanks a lot, everybody.
All right, good
Night.
night.
Take care.
Night.
You have to click over here.